In every age, human beings have stood before the work of art, before the poem, the novel, the tragedy, and asked with trembling and wonder, what does this mean? Who made this? For whom was it made? And what, in the name of truth, does it do to us? These are not simple questions. They are, in fact, inexhaustible questions, questions that have spawned centuries of argument, schools of thoughts, manifestos and counter-manifestos, entire architectures of intellectual life. Welcome, I am Madani Shamsuddin, and this channel exists for one reason: to think seriously, beautifully, rigorously about literature and the theories that dare to explain it. Today we enter the labyrinth, not to find the exit, but to understand why the labyrinth itself is the most important thing we have. Our subject, the plurality of critical discourse. Why no single map, no single theory, no single method can ever fully navigate the terrain of literary thought? Then let us begin. The central argument. Every great lecture, like every great poem, begins with a thesis, a stake driven into the earth, a flag planted not in conquest, but in invitation. Here is mine, here is yours. The history of literary criticism reveals not a linear progression toward truth, but a dialectical expansion in which each theoretical orientation simultaneously supplements and critiques its predecessors. Let that sit. We do not get closer to truth the way a train moves toward a station. We spiral, we expand, we look again, and differently each new school of thoughts does not bury what come before. It argues with it, it inherits from it, it transforms it. Marxism does not replace Romanticism. Deconstruction does not kill formalism. They enter into conversation, sometimes violent, sometimes tender, always generative. This is why we need multiple frameworks, not because we are undecided, not because we are confused, but because literature itself is too vast, too human, too alive, to be contained in any single net of theory. Plurality is not weakness, plurality is strength. Let us travel back, not merely to history, but to the origin of the argument itself, when human beings first began to ask what art is. They did not agree, they have never agreed, and that disagreement, that gorgeous, irreconcilable disagreement, is what made literary theory possible. Plato, the great suspicious father, for Plato, art is a copy of a copy. The painter paints a bed, but the bed itself is already an imitation of the ideal form of bed that exists in the realm of pure thought. Art, therefore, stands twice removed from truth, a shadow of a shadow. He did not hate beauty, he feared it. He feared what it could do to reason. Then came Aristotle, pragmatic, generous, corrective. For Aristotle, imitation is not a diminishment, it is how we learn. The artist captures not this particular man in his grief, but what it means universally, essentially, to grieve. Art purifies, art unifies, art teaches through pleasure. And then, ascending further still, yeah, Plotinus, the new Platonist mystic, who declared that the artist does not imitate the material world at all, The artist, said Plotinus, imitates the ideas directly, those eternal, luminous forms that the material world itself is merely trying to approximate. Art, then, is above the material. The artist touches the divine. Do you see what has happened? Three thinkers, three orientations, all asking the same question: what is art's relationship to reality? And arriving at three irreconcilably different answers. This is not a problem to be solved. This is the condition of literary thought. These are not evolutionary improvements. They are reorientations of focus, shifts in what we choose to eliminate and what we choose to leave in shadow. In 1953, a scholar named M.H. Abrams gave us one of the most elegant tools in the entire history of critical thought. He asked, when we talk about literature, what are we actually talking about? And he answered with a diagram, a simple luminous map of four coordinates. The word, the universe, the work, imitates or reflects. The author, the human consciousness that created it. The audience, the reader, the spectator, the listener, you. The work itself, the text, the poem, the object standing alone. Every school of literary criticism, said Abrams, orients itself toward one of these poles. Mimetic theories look toward the word, asking, does the work tell truth about reality? Expressive theories look toward the author, asking, what does this reveal about the soul who created it? Pragmatic theories took toward the audience, asking, what does this do to the reader? Does it teach? Does it move? Objective or formal theories look at the work itself, asking, what is the internal structure of this text? What makes it cohere or break apart? Abrams himself was clear. Any reasonable theory takes account of all four elements. Not one, not two, all four. The map is not the territory, but this map, this four concerned map, is perhaps the most honest map we have. And yet, uh, uh, and yet, as within all maps, we must ask, what does this map leave out? A map is an act of power. It decides what is center and what is margin. It decides what is visible and what is erased. It draws borders that nature never drew. Abrams' taxonomy is magnificent, but it implies a succession, a linearity, as though mimetic thought gave way to rhetorical thought, the way one dynasty falls and another rises. This is false. These orientations coexist. They argue across time, not merely in sequence. Then there is McKeon's or McKeon's semantic map. Somebody says that he's McKeon. So we have McKeon's semantic map, which groups critical schools not by history, but by mode of thought, the dialectical, the problematic, the logistic. It is intellectually profound. And we have also the operational, but it obscures the living history of ideas, the blood and argument and circumstance through which these schools emerged. And then there are the concentric circles of Crane and Friedman. which show us how close or how far each theory stands from the text itself. Formal criticism at the center, biographical criticism further out, archetypal criticism at the outermost ring. But, and this is crucial, by placing formalism at the center, the map privileges it. It smuggles in a hierarchy, while pretending to offer mere geometry. The philosopher Wittgenstein spoke of a ladder you use to climb to a higher place. Then, once you have arrived, you throw it away. These maps are Wittgenstein's ladder. They are necessary, they are generative, they help us ascend. But we must never confuse the ladder for the summit. So, how do we actually read criticism? How do we sit down with a scholarly essay, dense, elusive, bristling with footnotes, and understand not merely what it says, but what it is doing? There is a craft to this methodology. Let me offer you three movements, three disciplines that I practice and that you can practice too. First, identify the sources, not merely the ones cited in the footnotes, the deeper ones, the implied ones, the thinkers who hunt the margins without being named. When the critic Gayatri Spivak uses the word supplementarity, that single word she is invoking Jacques Derrida without writing his name. She is working within a tradition, drawing on a vocabulary, breathing in an intellectual atmosphere. Your task is to hear those echoes. Second, determine the stance. Is the critic defending their sources, critiquing them, synthesizing them into something new, deconstructing them to reveal their hidden contradictions? This is not a neutral question. Every critical essay is an act, intervention. It is written from a position with a purpose. Find the position, find the purpose. And third, identify the commitments. What does this critic believe? Not just intellectually, but structurally. What can they not see because of where they stand? What do they value without knowing they value it? Every critic has a horizon. Your job is to find it and then see past it. Consider the poet Eddine, who takes Mikhail Bakhtin, a theorist of the novel, of the dialogic voice, of heteroglossia, and deploys him to analyze the lyric poetry of Emily Dickinson. Lyric poetry, the most intimate, the most singular, the most anti-dialogic of forms. And yet, it works. It illuminates, it surprises, it teaches. This is the theoretical bricolage, theory as tool, not as prison. Taking the instrument from one workshop and discovering it transforms the work in another. Let us descend now into a single extraordinary example. Spivak, translator of Derrida, a post-colonial theorist, one of the most formidable minds in 20th century literary criticism. Her object of study, the Subaltern Studies historians, a group of South Asian scholars who, who set out to write history from the bottom up, to restore the voice of those whom officially history had silenced: the peasants, the women, the insurgents, the forgotten. But Spivak does something audacious. She does not simply read their conclusions, she reads their practice. the very texture of their writing, the assumptions buried inside their methodology. And she reads them through two lenses simultaneously, through Gramscian Marxism, asking how does this work engage with hegemony, with counter-hegemony, with the structures of power that determine who speaks and who is silenced, and through Derridian deconstruction, asking where does the text exceed its own intentions, where does it say more or less than it means to say, where do the historians' own texts endo their stated goals. Her verdict is stunning. The subaltern studies historians, she argues, are more radical than they know. Their project, this attempt to write history from below, constitutes constitutes a violent event in science systems, rupture in the very grammar of historical discourse, more radical, she suggests, than the actual insurgencies they chronicle. And more, they fail to recognize that discursive revolution precedes material revolution, that the battle for meaning comes before and makes possible the battle in the streets. This is not literary criticism as decoration. This is literary criticism as philosophy, as epistemology, as politics, as ethics. This is what it means to read at the highest level. There is an old problem in the philosophy of interpretation. It is called the Hermeneutic Circle. How do you understand a part of a text without understanding the whole? And how do you understand the whole without first understanding the parts? It seems like a paradox, a snake devouring its own tail, a door that can only be opened from inside. But it is not a paradox, it is a method. You begin with a provisional understanding of the whole, an issue, and complete impression um, gathered from your first encounter with text. You use that provisional whole to make sense of the individual parts. Then, as the parts become clearer, you return to the whole. And the whole is different now, richer, more precise, corrected, and you return again to the parts. This is not a circle, it is a spiral, ascending, deepening, approaching, never arriving. Reading Bakhtin enables you to understand Latin, but reading Latin changes your Bakhtin, expands him, corrects him, shows you dimensions in his thought you could not have seen before. This is what it means to be a reader, not to extract meaning from a text, as though meaning were a mineral or a mineral to be mined, but to dwell in the movements between part and whole, between text and context, between what was written and what you bring to it. Interpretation is not a destination, it is a way of traveling. We have traveled far today from Plato's suspicious gaze at the painter to Spivak's devastating reading of revolutionary historians, from the clean geometry of Abrams for coordinates to the living spiral of the Hermeneutic Circle. And what have we learned? We have learned, or perhaps remembered, three truths that I want to leave with you. First, no map captures all terrain. Every theoretical framework, every critical method, every school of thought has its blind spots. Not because it is wrong, but because it is particular, because it illuminates one corner of the room and in doing so casts another corner into shadow. The map is not the territory. The map is never the territory. Second, no reading achieves final closure. Interpretation is iterative, always approaching, never finally arriving. The text is not a puzzle with a solution, it is a conversation, ongoing, inexhaustible, renewed every time a new reader arrives with a new eyes and a new life. Third and most important, this very incompleteness makes criticism not only possible but necessary. If there were one method, one final reading, one correct theoretical lens, there would be no criticism. There would only be application. That would be the death of thoughts. The proliferation of critical theories, the arguments, the contradiction, the multiplicity signals something Plato himself, despite his suspicions, inguarted, an inquiring and speculative spirit that is thriving today as never before. Do not fear the complexity. Do not wish for simpler maps. Embrace the labyrinth. Learn to love um, the spiral. This is where thought lives. Thank you for watching, and thank you for sitting with these ideas, for giving your attention, which is the most precious thing you have to the questions that have no final answers. We may, in our next lecture, talk about structuralism and the death of the author, or we may talk about Plato theory with more concise details in terms of simplifying these terms. Thank you for watching. If you like the video, please hit subscribe.